I'm Sarah Mitchell, 34, a middle school teacher from Austin, Texas. When I filed for divorce from my charming, successful husband Marcus after 8 years of marriage, my family's reaction was swift and brutal. At our monthly family dinner, my mother actually laughed a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the dining room like glass. "Sarah's giving up on another good thing," she announced to my siblings, who exchanged knowing glances. Some people just can't appreciate what they have. They painted me as the unstable one, the woman who threw away a beautiful marriage to a respected investment banker for silly reasons. What they didn't know was that I had discovered Marcus's secret, a web of financial crimes that went far deeper than anyone could imagine. 3 months later, as we sat around that same dinner table, the evening news flickered on. The breaking story made my mother's fork clatter to her plate. There was Marcus, my perfect ex-husband, being led away in handcuffs on live television. The laughter had stopped. If you've ever felt unseen or betrayed by family, subscribe for more stories of healing and truth. I met Marcus at a charity fundraiser for the Austin Children's Hospital. I was there representing my school's volunteer program, feeling slightly out of place in my modest dress among the city's elite. Then this incredibly handsome man in a perfectly tailored suit approached me with a warm smile and introduced himself as Marcus Holloway, Senior Investment Advisor at Premier Financial Group. His business card was embossed with gold lettering, heavy stock paper that spoke of success and legitimacy. When he handed it to me, our fingers brushed, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine attraction mixed with possibility. "A teacher," he said when I told him about my work. "That's incredible. You're shaping young minds, making a real difference." Most men either glazed over when I mentioned my profession or made jokes about having summers off. Marcus seemed genuinely impressed. Within weeks, he was picking me up in his sleek BMW, taking me to restaurants I'd only read about in the local lifestyle magazine. He remembered everything, my favorite flowers, how I liked my coffee, the names. Of my students I'd mentioned, my family was immediately smitten. Finally, my mother said after meeting him for the first time, "Sarah found someone who can take care of her properly." She said it as if I'd been failing at life until that moment, as if my career and independence meant nothing without a man to validate them. My older sister Jessica, married to a successful lawyer, nodded approvingly. "He's got such good manners." "And that car," she whistled low. "You did well, Sarah." Even my younger brother Tom, usually skeptical of my choices, clapped Marcus on the back and said, "Welcome to the family, man." About time Sarah found someone with his head screwed on straight. Their acceptance of Marcus felt like approval I'd been seeking my entire life. Growing up, I'd always been the middle child, the one who chose teaching over law or medicine, who rented apartments instead of buying houses, who seemed to drift through life without the laser focus my siblings possessed. Marcus proposed after 6 months, a stunning ring that made my mother cry actual tears of joy. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, as if my worth had finally been validated by a man's choice to marry me. The wedding was everything. I dreamed of elegant, tasteful, with Marcus handling most of the arrangements because he had connections. My family beamed throughout the ceremony, and I felt like I was finally living up to their expectations. But even then, there were small signs I chose to ignore. The way Marcus would gently steer conversations away from topics that made him uncomfortable. How he'd suggest what I should wear to his work events. His subtle corrections when I tell a story that didn't quite align with the image he wanted to project. "You're so lucky," my mother would say whenever we visited. "Marcus is such a catch. Don't mess this up, Sarah." I internalized that message completely. Whatever small doubts I had, I pushed them down. After all, my family had never been this proud of me. How could I risk losing that? The first crack in my perfect marriage appeared in our 3rd year, hidden in a credit card statement that arrived with Marcus's name on it, a card I didn't know existed. I found it mixed in with our regular mail, and when I opened it out of habit, my breath caught. Charges for thousands of dollars at high-end restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel stays in cities Marcus had never mentioned visiting. Jewelry purchases that hadn't come home to me. When I confronted him that evening, his explanation was smooth, practiced. It's a business card, sweetheart. Client dinners, conferences. You know how it is in finance, appearances matter. He kissed my forehead gently. I should have mentioned it, but I didn't want to bore you with work details. The explanation made sense, but something about his tone felt rehearsed. Still, I wanted to believe him. My family's constant praise for Marcus made questioning him feel like questioning my own judgment. As months passed, the inconsistencies multiplied. Marcus would claim to be working late, but when I called his office, his assistant would sound confused. "Mr. Holloway left hours ago," she'd say. When I mentioned it, Marcus would grow irritated. "You're checking up on me now? That's not like you, Sarah. Marriage is about trust." He was right, it wasn't like me. I'd never been the suspicious type, had always prided myself on being trusting and open. But the feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. A constant knot of unease that I couldn't shake. His phone became a fortress. Where he'd once casually left it on the counter, now it was always face down, always locked, always within arm's reach. When it buzzed during dinner, he'd glance at it with an expression I couldn't read. "Work emergency," he'd say, excusing himself. To take calls in his home office, a room that had become increasingly off limits to me. The worst part was how he made me feel crazy for noticing. "You're being paranoid," he'd say when I'd mention his changed behavior. "Maybe you should talk to someone about this anxiety. It's not healthy." My family, of course, took his side without hesitation. When I carefully mentioned my concerns to my mother during one of our weekly calls, her response was predictable. "Sarah, you're overthinking things. Marcus works hard to provide for you. The least you can do is trust him." Her tone carried that familiar edge of disappointment. "Successful men have demands on their time. You should be grateful, not suspicious." Jessica was even more direct. "You're being ridiculous. Do you know how many women would kill to have what you have? Stop looking for problems where there aren't any." Their dismissal stung, but it also made me question myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just what marriage to a successful man looked like. Maybe I was the problem. But late at night, when Marcus was asleep beside me, I'd lie awake, thinking about the credit card statement, the mysterious phone calls, the way he changed the subject whenever I asked about his work. The evidence was subtle but mounting, and despite my family's assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The man I'd married was becoming a stranger, hiding behind a facade of success and charm, and I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, suspicious, anxious, constantly second-guessing my own instincts. Something had to give. The truth came to me on a Tuesday afternoon in March, through the most mundane of circumstances. Marcus had called in sick to work with what he claimed was food poisoning, but I'd seen him sneaking bites of toast when he thought I wasn't looking. Still, I played along, bringing him soup and checking on him between my classes. When I came home early from school that day, I found him gone. His car was missing from the driveway, and a quick check revealed his sickbed hadn't been slept in. My heart hammered as I called his name through the empty house, knowing he wouldn't answer. That's when I noticed his home office door was slightly ajar unusual, since he always kept it locked. Inside, his computer was still on, the screensaver dancing across the monitor. For months, I'd wondered what he did in there during those long evening sessions. Now I had my chance to find out. I shouldn't have looked. I knew it was wrong, It was a violation of his privacy. But the knot in my stomach had grown into a constant ache, and I needed to know why my instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. His email was open, and what I found made my legs give out. I sank into his leather chair, staring at screen after screen of communications that revealed a man I'd never known existed. Marcus wasn't just hiding an affair, he was running an elaborate financial fraud scheme. Emails detailed fake investment, opportunities he was selling to unsuspecting clients, bank account numbers I didn't recognize, discussions about moving money through shell companies, references to cleaning funds and keeping transactions under the radar. My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message. There were communications with people I never heard of, discussing strategies for laundering money through legitimate businesses. detailed plans for creating false documentation, calculations showing how much money was being stolen from his clients, accounts. The worst part was discovering that some of his victims were people I knew. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store, who trusted Marcus with her late husband's life insurance payout. The Johnsons, who'd hired him to manage their retirement savings. People who'd believed in his charm and expertise. Just like I found records showing he'd been doing this for years, long before he'd met me, the successful businessman persona, the expensive suits, the luxury car. It was all built on lies and theft. The man I'd married was a criminal, and I'd been living with him, sleeping beside him. Completely oblivious to the truth, my phone rang, making me jump. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it with new eyes. When I answered, my voice came out steady despite the chaos in my head. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" "Much better," he said, his voice warm and loving. "I think I'll be able to make it to dinner with your parents tonight, after all." The casualness of his lie, delivered with such practiced ease, made my stomach turn. This man had been deceiving me for years, using our marriage as cover for his criminal activities. And tonight he'd sit at my parents' table, charming them with the same fake personality he'd used to charm his victims. "That's wonderful," I managed to say. "I'll see you at home." After hanging up, I sat in his chair surrounded by evidence of his crimes and realized that everything I thought I knew about my life had been a lie. That night at dinner, I watched Marcus charm my parents with new eyes. Every smile, every laugh, every thoughtful question about their lives felt like a performance I was seeing for the first time. When my father complimented him on his latest business success, Marcus deflected with false humility. "Just doing my best to take care of my clients," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "They trust me with their futures." The irony made me sick. Over the following weeks, I became someone I'd never been before: calculating, secretive, strategic. I started documenting everything, creating a hidden file on my laptop that I password protected and stored in a folder, labeled lesson plans. Every time Marcus left the house, I'd slip into his office to photograph documents, copy email addresses, and record bank account numbers. I learned to clear browser histories, to cover my tracks, to act normal when he came home. The woman who'd once been terrible at keeping surprise parties secret was now living a double life with frightening skill. The scope of his crimes was staggering. I discovered he'd been stealing from his clients for at least 5 years, moving money through a network of fake companies and offshore accounts. The investment firm where he worked had no idea he'd been using their reputation to lend credibility to his private schemes. Some days, the weight of what I knew felt crushing. I'd stand in front of my 7th grade students, teaching them about honesty and integrity while harboring secrets that could destroy lives. The normalcy of school, the bell schedules, the homework assignments, the parent conferences felt surreal against the backdrop of my crumbling marriage. Marcus seemed to sense something was different about me, though he couldn't pinpoint what. He became more attentive, bringing me flowers, planning surprise date nights, telling me how much he loved me. The kindness felt like manipulation now, and I wondered if it had always been that way. "You seem distant lately," he said one evening, as we watched TV together. "Is everything okay?" "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "School's been stressful." He nodded sympathetically, but I caught him studying my face with those sharp eyes that had once made me feel special. Now they felt calculating, predatory. The hardest part was the isolation. I couldn't confide in anyone, not my family, not my closest friends. They all adored Marcus, saw him as the perfect husband who'd rescued me from spinsterhood. How could I explain that their golden boy was a criminal without sounding like a jealous, delusional wife? Instead, I threw myself into research. I learned about financial crimes, money laundering, investment fraud. I studied the legal system, understanding what evidence would be needed to build a case. I became an expert in my husband's field of crime, all while maintaining the facade of the loving, supportive wife. At night, I'd lie awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing and wondering how someone could live such a complete lie. How could he kiss me goodnight, knowing what he'd done during the day? How could he make love to me, knowing he was putting me at risk. The file on my laptop grew thicker by the day. Bank statements, email printouts, photographs of documents. I was building a case against my own husband, gathering evidence that would destroy the life we built together. But I knew I had to see it through. Too many people had been hurt by his lies. Too many families had trusted him with their futures, only to have that trust betrayed. Someone had to stop him, and I was the only one who knew the truth. The question was, what would I do with it? I chose a Saturday morning for the confrontation, and we had the whole day ahead of us, and nowhere, urgent to be. Marcus was reading the financial section of the Austin American Statesman at our kitchen table, coffee steaming beside him, looking every inch the successful businessman he pretended to be. "We need to talk," I said, setting my laptop down across. From him, he looked up with that warm smile that had once made my heart skip. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I opened the laptop to the file I've been building for weeks. I know about the money laundering, Marcus. I know about the fake investment schemes. I know about the clients you've been stealing from. For just a moment, his mask slipped. I saw surprise, then calculation, then something cold and predatory cross his features. But he recovered quickly, letting out a laugh that sounded genuinely confused. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Have you been snooping through my work files?" "I have copies of everything," I said, turning the screen toward him. "Bank statements, emails, records of fake companies. I know about the Hendersons' money, the Johnson's retirement fund. I know about all of it." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more controlled. "You shouldn't have gone through my private files." "Your private files?" "Marcus, these are records of crimes. People trust you with their life savings, and you're stealing from them." He closed the newspaper slowly, deliberately. "It's not that simple, Sarah. Business is complicated. Sometimes you have to be creative to generate the returns people expect." "Creative?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You're not being creative. You're being criminal. Mrs. Henderson is living on Social Security because you stole her husband's life insurance money." "I borrowed it," he said sharply. "I fully intend to pay everyone back with interest once my investments mature." "What investments?" "The shell companies are fake, Marcus. The offshore accounts are just places to hide stolen money. There are no investments." That's when his facade cracked completely. The charming businessman disappeared, replaced by someone I never seen before, cold, calculating, dangerous. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, standing slowly. "You're a middle school teacher, Sarah. You don't understand high finance. I understand fraud when I see it." He moved around the table toward me, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt afraid of him. "What exactly do you think you're going to do with this information?" "I'm going to turn it over to the authorities." "No, you're not." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "You're my wife. You're not going to destroy our life over something you don't understand." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, showing him the recording app that had been running throughout our conversation. "I understand perfectly, and I have everything I need." His face went white, then red with rage. "You recorded me?" "I recorded a confession from my husband, who's been lying to me for years." "Sarah, you need to think about what you're doing. If you go to the police, they'll come after you too. You're an accessory now. You knew about this and didn't report it immediately." The threat hung in the air between us, but I'd already thought about that possibility. "Maybe, but I'm not going to let you keep hurting people." Those people knew the risks. No one forced them to invest. They didn't know the real risks because you lied to them. Just like you lied to me. He sank back into his chair, the fight going out of him. "What do you want, Sarah?" "Money? We can work something out." "I want a divorce, and I want you to turn yourself in." "That's not going to happen." "Then I'll do it for you." We stared at each other across the kitchen table, the life we built together crumbling in the space between us. The man I married was gone, replaced by a stranger who threatened me in my own home. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You have until Monday. Then I'm going to the FBI." He nodded slowly, and I saw him calculating, planning, trying to find a way out of the trap he'd built for himself. But it was too late. I'd already made my choice. The recording on my phone would be the evidence that destroyed him, but it would also be the proof that I'd finally found the courage to do what was right. Monday morning found me in the offices of Patterson and Associates, sitting across from Diana Patterson, one of Austin's most respected divorce attorneys. I'd chosen her specifically because she had experience with high-asset divorces involving criminal activity. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, reviewing the documents I provided, "this is quite a complex situation. Before we proceed with the divorce, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." I walked her through everything: the financial fraud, the fake companies, the stolen client money. She listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. "Have you contacted the authorities about your husband's activities?" she asked. "Not yet. I wanted to file for divorce first, to protect myself legally before he's arrested." She nodded approvingly. "That's wise. Once criminal charges are filed, things will become much more complicated. Your husband will likely try to hide assets, and you'll need to be prepared for a very public and messy process." The divorce papers themselves were surprisingly simple, just a few pages that would legally end 8 years of marriage. But the implications were staggering. I was about to become a divorced woman, something I'd never imagined for myself. "I need to warn you," Dinah said as I signed the documents. "Your husband will probably try to convince you to change your mind. Men like him are skilled manipulators. They'll use every tool at their disposal: guilt, fear, promises of change. He's already tried threatening me." Her expression hardened. "If he threatens you again, you call the police immediately. And you might want to consider staying somewhere else for a while." I hadn't thought about that. The house that had been our home for 5 years suddenly felt unsafe. "I'll figure something out. There's also the matter of your safety once the investigation begins. When people realize they've been defrauded, emotions run high. You might become a target simply by association." The weight of what I was doing settled on my shoulders. By filing for divorce, I wasn't just ending my marriage, I was potentially putting myself in danger. But the alternative was continuing to live with a criminal, being complicit in his crimes through my silence. "What about the timing?" I asked. "Should I serve him the papers before or after I contact the FBI?" "Before. If he's arrested first, he might claim the divorce is retaliatory, or that you're trying to distance yourself from his crimes to avoid prosecution. This way, we establish that you were already seeking to end the marriage." I thought about Marcus at home, probably planning his next move, maybe trying to figure out how to silence me or cover his tracks. The weekend had been tense, both of us pretending everything was normal while we both knew our marriage was over. "How long does the process take?" I asked. "In Texas, there's a 60-day waiting period minimum. But given the complexity of your situation, it could take much longer. Asset division will be complicated, especially if criminal charges are filed." She handed me a thick folder containing copies of all the paperwork. "These need to be served to your husband within the next few days. I'd recommend using a professional process server. It's safer and more legally sound." Walking out of the law office, I felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. The divorce papers in my hands represented the end of the life I'd known, but also the beginning of something new. For the first time in months, I was taking control of my own destiny. Now I just had to find the courage to see it through. The monthly family dinner at my parents' house had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. Every first Sunday, we'd gather around the same mahogany table where I'd eaten countless meals growing up. This particular evening, I dreaded it more than any gathering in my life. I'd had the divorce papers served to Marcus on Thursday. By Friday, he'd called everyone in my family, painting himself as the victim of an unstable wife who'd lost her mind. By Sunday, they were all armed with opinions about my breakdown. "Sarah, honey," my mother said as I walked through the front door, "Marcus called us. He's very worried about you." "He should be worried about himself," I replied, hanging my jacket in the closet where I'd hung it 1,000 times before. "What does that mean?" My father asked, looking up from his newspaper. I took a breath, preparing myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. It means I have good reasons for divorcing him. Reasons? Jessica laughed as she set the table. Sarah, you've been married for 8 years. You don't just throw that away without trying to work things out. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm protecting myself. From what? Tom asked, genuinely confused. Marcus is one of the most decent guys I know. That's when I made the mistake of trying to tell them the truth. I explained about the financial fraud, the stolen money, the fake companies. I showed them copies of some of the documents I'd found. Tried to walk them through the evidence. The response was exactly what I'd feared. Sarah, this is crazy talk, my mother said, her voice rising with each word. You're talking about Marcus like he's some kind of criminal. He's a successful businessman. Who loves you? He's stealing from his clients, Mom. I have proof. You have papers you don't understand, my father said firmly. High finance is complicated. Just because you can't follow the business dealings doesn't mean they're illegal. I'm not stupid, Dad. I know the difference between complex business and fraud. Do you? Jessica asked, her voice sharp with judgment. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having some kind of breakdown. You're saying conspiracies where there aren't any. This is exactly what Marcus said would happen, Tom added. He said you've been acting paranoid, seeing problems that weren't there. The betrayal in that moment was almost physical. My own family was taking the word of my husband over mine, dismissing evidence I'd risked my safety to gather. You didn't even look at the documents, I said, my voice breaking. You won't even consider that I might be telling the truth. The truth? My mother's laugh was a sound that would haunt me for months. Sarah, the truth is that you're giving up on a good man for no reason. Some people just can't appreciate what they have. You're making a huge mistake, Jessica said, shaking her head. Marcus is the best thing that ever happened to you. When you come to your senses, I hope it's not too late. Maybe you should see someone, my father suggested. A therapist. This paranoid thinking isn't healthy. I looked around the table at these people who'd raised me, who claimed to love me, and realized that they'd never really seen me at all. They saw the version of me that made them comfortable, the middle child who'd finally found stability through marriage to a successful man. I don't need therapy, I said quietly. I need my family to believe me. We want to believe you, my mother said, reaching across the table to take my hand. But what you're saying doesn't make sense. Marcus is a good man. He's been nothing but loving and supportive. He's been lying to all of us. Sarah, enough. My father's voice carried the tone that had ended arguments throughout my childhood. You're embarrassing yourself and hurting your family with this nonsense. I stood up from the table, my appetite gone. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. Where are you going? Tom asked. Home, to pack. I'm staying at a hotel until the divorce is final. This is ridiculous, Jessica said. You're throwing away your marriage, your home, your future for what? Some crazy theory about Marcus being a criminal? It's not a theory. Then prove it. My mother said, if you're so sure, call the police. Report him, but you won't, because deep down you know you're wrong. Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because she was right, but because she was daring me to do the very thing. I'd been planning to do the thing that would vindicate me, but destroy the image of Marcus they all loved. Maybe I will, I said quietly. Good, she replied. And when they tell you there's nothing wrong, maybe you'll stop this nonsense and apologize to your husband. I walked out of that house knowing I'd lost more than my marriage. I'd lost my family's trust, their support, their love. They'd chosen Marcus over me, and that choice would haunt all of us in the weeks to come. The recording I made on my phone during that dinner would later serve as a painful reminder of how completely I'd been abandoned by the people who should have protected me. But it would also remind me of the moment I decided to trust my own instincts, regardless of who believed me. Sometimes you have to save yourself. The extended stay hotel room became my sanctuary and my prison. For 2 weeks, I lived out of a suitcase, surrounded by legal documents and the evidence I gathered against Marcus. The small desk by the window served as my command center, where I'd sit each evening after school, writing in my journal and trying to make sense of the chaos my life had become. March 15th. Day 3 at the hotel, I keep waiting for someone to call, to check on me, to ask my side of the story, but the phone stays silent. Marcus has done his work well. I'm the crazy wife having a breakdown, not the woman who discovered her husband was a criminal. The isolation was suffocating. My colleagues at school noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't explain without revealing Marcus's crimes. I'd become skilled at deflecting questions with vague responses about working through some things and needing space. Marcus, meanwhile, had launched what I could only describe as a charm offensive. Flowers arrived at my school with notes about how much he missed me and wanted to work things out. He called my parents daily, expressing concern about my mental health and his willingness to help me through this difficult time. He's been by the house 3 times this week, my mother reported during one of our increasingly strained phone calls. He's devastated, Sarah. He just wants his wife back. The manipulation was masterful. By positioning himself as the long-suffering husband dealing with an unstable wife, he'd gained sympathy and support from everyone who mattered. I was the villain in my own story. March 20th, day 8, saw Marcus at the grocery store today. He looked genuinely sad, genuinely worried. For a moment, I almost believed his performance myself. How do you live with someone for 8 years and never see who they really are? The legal process moved with agonizing slowness. Diana Patterson assured me that everything was proceeding normally, but each day felt like a lifetime. I found myself questioning everything. My evidence, my memories, my sanity. Maybe my family was right. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown, but then I'd look at the documents spread across my hotel room desk, and the facts would reassert themselves. Numbers don't lie. Bank statements don't have nervous breakdowns. The evidence was real even if no one believed me. March 25th, day 13, called Mrs. Henderson today to check on her. She mentioned that Marcus had stopped by to check on her investments and assured her that everything was fine. The audacity of it takes my breath away. He's still actively deceiving people, still stealing from them, while positioning himself as the victim of my accusations. The hardest part was maintaining my composure at work. My 7th graders were dealing with their own dramas from breakups, family problems, the usual adolescent angst, and I found myself oddly comforted by their concerns. Their problems were real but solvable, their emotions honest and uncomplicated. Mrs. Holloway, one of my students asked after class, "Are you okay? You seem sad." This simple question from a 12-year-old nearly broke me. Here was someone who actually saw me, who noticed my pain without judgment or agenda. "I'm going through a difficult time," I admitted, "but I'll be okay." "My parents got divorced last year," she said matter-of-factly. "It was hard, but now they're both happier." Sometimes people need to make big changes to find their happiness. The wisdom from that young girl carried me through the rest of the day. Sometimes people need to make big changes to find their happiness. I was making the biggest change of my life, and everyone around me was telling me I was wrong to do it. But what if I was right? What if my instincts, my evidence, my gut feeling about Marcus were all correct? What if I was the only one brave enough to see the truth? The thought terrified and empowered me in equal measure. Tomorrow, I would call the FBI. Tomorrow, I would stop living in limbo and start fighting for justice. The journal entry I wrote that night was different from the others, shorter, more decisive. March 30th, day 18, enough waiting. Enough doubt. Time to act. The FBI field office in Austin was not what I'd expected. Instead of the dramatic, high-tech facility I'd seen in movies, it was a modest building with standard government furniture and fluorescent lighting. I sat in a conference room that could have been in any office building, facing Special Agent Jennifer Walsh and Agent Marcus Chun. Agent Walsh was younger than I'd anticipated, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Agent Chun was older, more reserved, taking careful notes as I spoke. Between us on the table was Agent Walsh's business card. Simple white cardstock with the FBI seal that somehow made everything feel devastatingly real. "Mrs. Holloway," Agent Walsh began, "when you called our financial crimes unit, you mentioned having evidence of investment fraud and money laundering. Can you walk us through what you've discovered?" I opened the folder I prepared and began laying out documents. Bank statements, email printouts, photographs of Marcus's computer screen months, of careful documentation spread across the conference table. "My husband has been stealing from his investment clients for at least 5 years, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He creates fake investment opportunities, moves money through shell companies, and uses offshore accounts to hide the stolen funds." Agent Chen looked up from his notes. "How did you discover this?" "I found his computer unlocked one day when he claimed to be sick. I've been suspicious for months because of his secretive behavior and unexplained expenses." "And you've been documenting this activity since then?" "Yes, I made copies of everything I could find, took photographs, recorded conversations. I know it was illegal for me to access his files, but—" "Mrs. Holloway?" Agent Walsh interrupted. Gently, "You're married to him. In Texas, that gives you certain rights regarding shared property, including computers in your home. Let's focus on what you found." For the next 2 hours, I walked them through Marcus's entire operation. They asked detailed questions about specific transactions, client names, the timing of various schemes. Their expertise was evident. They understood the financial complexity better than I did and could see patterns I'd missed. "This is substantial," Agent Walsh said finally, gathering the documents. "The dollar amounts alone would make this a federal case, but the sophistication of the money laundering scheme puts it in a whole different category." "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll need to verify everything you provided and expand the investigation. That means surveillance, subpoenas for bank records, interviews with potential victims. It's going to take time." "How much time?" "Months, possibly longer. Financial crimes investigations are complex. We need to build an airtight case before we make any arrests." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask, does your husband suspect that you've contacted us?" "No, as far as he knows, I'm just a wife having a breakdown who filed for divorce. My family believes that version too." "Good. It's crucial that he doesn't know about the investigation. Financial criminals are flight risks. They have the means and the connections to disappear quickly. What about my safety?" I asked. "He's become increasingly desperate since I filed for divorce. Has he threatened you directly?" "During our confrontation, he implied that I could be charged as an accessory if I reported him. He said no one would believe me anyway." Agent Walsh exchanged a look with her partner. "We'll need you to be very careful. Don't do anything that might tip him off. Continue with the divorce proceedings normally. If he approaches you or if anything feels threatening, contact us immediately." She handed me a card with her direct number. "This investigation will likely impact your divorce proceedings. There may be assets that need to be frozen, accounts that can't be accessed. You should prepare your attorney. What about the victims? Some of these people have lost their life savings. Recovery funds is part of our investigation. But I won't lie to you, victims of investment fraud rarely recover everything they've lost. Your husband has had years to move and hide money." The weight of that reality settled on me, Mrs. Henderson. The Johnsons, dozens of other people who trusted Marcus with their futures. They might never get their money back. And I was partially responsible for that, having lived with him for years without knowing what he was doing. "Mrs. Holloway," Agent Chen said, seeming to read my thoughts, "you're not responsible for your husband's crimes. By coming forward, you're helping us stop him from hurting more people. What if no one believes me when this comes out? My family already thinks I'm having a breakdown." Agent Walsh smiled grimly. "When we arrest someone for federal financial crimes, the evidence speaks for itself. Your family will have to confront the truth whether they want to or not." Walking out of the FBI office, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. The investigation had begun, and there was no going back. I crossed a line that would change everything, not just for Marcus and me, but for every person whose life had been touched by his crimes. That evening, I sat in my hotel room staring at Agent Walsh's business card, knowing that I'd just said, in motion events that would ultimately destroy the carefully constructed lie that had been my marriage. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally doing the right thing. Now I just had to wait for justice to catch up with the truth. Returning to my classroom after meeting with the FB, I felt like stepping into a parallel universe. Here, surrounded by colorful bulletin boards and the innocent chatter of 13-year-olds, the federal investigation seemed like something from another life. "Mrs. Holloway, are you feeling better?" asked Emma, one of my brightest students, as I organized papers at my desk. "You seemed worried lately." My classroom had always been my sanctuary, the place where I felt most like myself. Teaching gave me purpose and clarity in a way nothing else did. Now it served as an anchor to normalcy while everything else in my life spiraled into chaos. "I'm doing better, thank you for asking," I told Emma, and it wasn't entirely a lie. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking action rather than just enduring. But maintaining the secret was exhausting. During lunch, when my colleague Rachel asked about my living situation, I had to craft careful responses. "Marcus and I are working through some things," I said, picking at my salad. "I'm staying at a hotel temporarily while we figure it out." "Marriage is hard," she replied sympathetically. "But you two always seem so perfect together." The word perfect made my stomach clench. If only she knew that our perfect marriage had been built on lies and criminal activity. Meanwhile, Marcus had intensified his campaign to win back public sympathy. He'd started showing up at school events, playing the role of the concerned husband whose wife was having a breakdown. At the spring faculty meeting, he appeared with coffee and pastries for everyone. "Sarah's been under a lot of stress," he told. The principal, Dr. Martinez, with just the right amount of worry in his voice. "I'm hoping some time and space will help her work through whatever she's dealing with." The performance was masterful. He positioned himself as the patient, loving husband while subtly reinforcing the narrative that I was unstable. Watching him work the room, shaking hands, and accepting sympathy, I marveled at his skill as a manipulator. That evening, Agent Walsh called with an update. "We've begun preliminary surveillance and started verifying the information you provided. Everything is checking out so far." "How long before you arrest him?" "We're still building the case. These investigations take time. We need to trace all the money, identify all the victims, ensure we have enough evidence for a conviction." He's getting more desperate. Yesterday, he sent flowers to my school with a note saying he forgives me for my confusion and wants to work things out. That's actually helpful. It shows his consciousness of guilt. He knows something is wrong, even if he doesn't know about the investigation. The waiting was agonizing. Every day, I watched Marcus continue his normal routine, meeting with new clients, attending business events, living his life as if nothing had changed. The knowledge that he was still actively defrauding people while under investigation felt like carrying a physical weight. My family continued their pressure campaign. My mother called weekly with updates on Marcus's well-being and subtle guilt trips about my behavior. "He looks terrible, Sarah. He's lost weight, and he seems so sad. Whatever problems you think you have, surely they can be worked out." "Mom, some problems can't be worked out. Marriage is about forgiveness and compromise. Your father and I have been through rough patches too." I wanted to scream that this wasn't a rough patch, it was criminal fraud. But I couldn't say anything without compromising the investigation. The isolation was crushing. I couldn't confide in friends, couldn't seek support from family, couldn't even talk to my therapist about the real issues without risking the case. I was trapped in a bubble of secrecy, watching my old life continue around me while knowing it was all about to implode. But I found strength in small victories. Mrs. Henderson called to thank me for checking in on her investments, not knowing that my visit had been reconnaissance for the FBI, my students. PROGRESS reports showed improvement despite my personal turmoil. Agent Walsh's periodic updates confirmed that the investigation was moving forward. Each day I didn't break, didn't reveal the secret, didn't crumble under the pressure, was a day closer to justice. I was learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting correctly despite being terrified. In my hotel room each night, I'd look at my teaching awards on the dresser and remind myself who I really was. Sarah Mitchell, Educator, truth teller, someone who protected the innocent. Not the unstable wife everyone thought I was, but a woman strong enough to do what was right, even when it cost her everything. The Travis County Courthouse was bustling with activity on the morning of our final divorce hearing. I sat on a wooden bench outside Family Court 3, clutching the folder that contained our entire marriage reduced to legal documents. Dinah Patterson sat beside me, reviewing her notes one last time. "Remember," she said quietly, "this is just the dissolution hearing. The criminal investigation is separate. We're here to end the marriage, nothing more." Marcus arrived with his attorney, David Brennan, a sharp-dressed man who specialized in high-asset divorces. Marcus looked the part of the wounded husband suit, pressed, tie straight, expression appropriately somber. He nodded politely in my direction, the picture of civility. When our case was called, we filed into the courtroom. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s, reviewed our paperwork with practiced efficiency. "This is an uncontested divorce," she noted. "Both parties have agreed to the terms of asset division and there are no children involved. Mrs. Holloway, you are representing yourself as the petitioner. Are you satisfied with the proposed settlement?" The settlement was straightforward. I would keep my teacher's retirement account and personal belongings, while Marcus retained the house and most financial assets. What the judge didn't know was that many of those assets were likely derived from criminal activity and would soon be frozen by federal investigators. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "Mr. Holloway, do you contest any aspect of this divorce?" Marcus stood, his voice heavy with false emotion. "No, Your Honor, I just want Sarah to be happy, even if that means ending our marriage." The performance was, for my benefit, I realized, one last attempt to position himself as the noble, selfless husband who was graciously granting his unstable wife her freedom. Judge Morrison stamped the final decree. The marriage between Sarah Mitchell and Marcus Holloway is hereby dissolved. This court orders that the divorce is final as of today's date. 8 years of marriage ended with the sound of a stamp hitting paper outside the courthouse. Marcus approached me while our attorneys spoke privately. "Sarah, I hope you find whatever you're looking for," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of wounded sincerity. "I'll always love you, regardless of what you think of me." "I know exactly what you are," I replied quietly. His mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw calculation behind his eyes. "Be careful, Sarah. Sometimes the truth isn't what we think it is." It was a subtle threat wrapped in concern, and it reminded me why I'd made the right choice. This man, who could stand on courthouse steps and threaten his ex-wife while maintaining a facade of concern, was exactly the criminal I'd reported to the FBI. Diana walked me to my car, the final divorce decree safely in my hands. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, and realized I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't bound to Marcus Holloway. Whatever happened with the criminal investigation, I was no longer his wife. I legally separated myself from his crimes and his lies. That evening, I called Agent Walsh to update her on the divorce. "Good," she said. "That removes one complication from the investigation. When we arrest him, there won't be any questions about spousal privilege or coercion." "When will that happen?" "Soon. We're finalizing the indictment now. Within the next few weeks, your ex-husband will be in federal custody." I hung up and looked around my hotel room, still temporary, still displaced, but no longer trapped. The divorce decree on my dresser represented more than the end of a marriage. It was proof that I'd found the courage to choose truth over comfort, justice over security. Tomorrow, I would start looking for an apartment. Next week, I would begin rebuilding my life as a single woman. And soon, very soon, everyone would understand why I'd walked away from my perfect marriage. The woman who had been dismissed as unstable and paranoid would be vindicated. But more importantly, the victims of Marcus's crimes would finally see justice served. 3 weeks after my divorce was finalized, Agent Walsh called with the news I'd been both anticipating and dreading. "Sarah, I need you to come in. We're ready to move forward with the arrest, and there are some things we need to discuss." I met her at the same FBI conference room where this had all begun. This time, there was a thick manila folder on the table between us, along with what looked like a legal document stamped with official seals. "This is the federal indictment," she said, sliding the document toward me. "Marcus Holloway is being charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and operating an illegal investment scheme." The grand jury returned the indictment yesterday. I stared at the official document that would destroy the life I'd known. United States of America v. Marcus James Holloway. The weight of the federal government backing up what I'd known to be true felt surreal. "The arrest will happen tomorrow morning. We'll take him at his office. It's cleaner that way, less chance of him destroying evidence or fleeing." "Will it be public?" "The arrest itself will be relatively quiet, but once he's processed and the charges are filed, it becomes public record. The media will pick it up quickly, especially given his profile in the Austin business community." Agent Walsh leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah, I want you to be prepared for what's coming. This is going to be a media circus. Your ex-husband was well known, respected in financial circles. When this story breaks, everyone will want to know how his wife didn't know what he was doing. But I did know. That's why I'm divorced. We know that, and the evidence supports it. But the public narrative will be complicated. Some people will see you as a hero for reporting him. Others will question why you didn't come forward sooner, why you lived with him for years without suspecting anything. The thought of public scrutiny terrified me. I'd spent months being dismissed. By my own family, the idea of being judged by strangers was overwhelming. What about the victims? Have you contacted them? We've been interviewing them as part of the investigation. Mrs. Henderson, the Johnsons, about 30 other individuals and families. The total amount stolen exceeds $2.8 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. Nearly $3 million stolen from people who trusted him, who'd believed in his expertise and charm just like I had. Will they get their money back? We've traced some of it to offshore accounts, but recovery will be difficult. Much of it has been spent your house, the cars, the lifestyle he maintained. The victims will be able to file for restitution, but realistically, they'll recover maybe 30 cents on the dollar. I thought about Mrs. Henderson, living on Social Security while Marcus had used her husband's life insurance money to buy expensive dinners and hotel stays. The injustice of it made my chest tight with anger. "There's something else," Agent Walsh continued. "Given your cooperation with our investigation and the crucial evidence you provided, there's a good chance you'll be called as a witness if this goes to trial." "Will he fight the charges?" "Hard to say. With the evidence we have, his best option will be to plea bargain. But men like your ex-husband often have inflated senses of their own intelligence. He might think he can beat the charges." I imagine Marcus in federal court still playing the role of the respectable businessman, still believing he could charm his way out of consequences. How should I prepare for tomorrow? Stay away from your old neighborhood. Avoid places where you might encounter him or his associates. Don't talk to reporters if they approach you. And Sarah, she paused, making sure I was listening. Whatever happens in the next few weeks, remember that you did the right thing. You stopped a criminal and protected future victims. Driving back to my hotel that night, I felt the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow, Marcus would be arrested. The story would break. My family would finally understand why I'd left him. The victims would learn they'd been defrauded. Everything would change. I'd spent months living with the knowledge of Marcus's crimes, watching him continue to hurt people while I built a case against him. Tomorrow, that knowledge would become public, and the man who'd convinced everyone I was unstable would be revealed as exactly what I'd said he was. Criminal. The indictment sitting on my hotel room desk was more than a legal document. It was vindication, justice, and the beginning of the end of the longest, most difficult chapter of my life. I was ready for the storm to finally break. Was grading papers in my classroom when my phone buzzed with a text from Agent Walsh. "It's done. Turn on the news." My hands trembled as I pulled up the local news website on my computer. The breaking news banner made my heart stop. Prominent Austin financial advisor arrested on federal fraud charges. There was Marcus being led out of the Premier Financial Group building in handcuffs. The footage was surreal. This man I'd lived with for 8 years, who'd made coffee beside me every morning, who'd kissed me goodbye at this very school now, being escorted to a federal vehicle like the criminal. He was, the reporter's voice narrated over the footage, Marcus Holloway, 38, was arrested this morning on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and operating an illegal investment scheme. Federal investigators allege that Holloway defrauded clients of nearly $3 million over a 5-year period. I watched the clip 3 times, still unable to fully process that this was real. The Marcus on screen looked smaller somehow, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like shock. This was the moment I'd been working toward for months, and now that it was here, I felt strangely empty. My phone started ringing immediately. The first call was from my mother. Sarah? Sarah, are you watching the news? Yes, Mom. I don't understand. They're saying Marcus was arrested for fraud. That can't be right. It's right, Mom. It's all true. There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, confused. But you said you told us he was stealing money, and we thought you thought I was having a breakdown. Oh God, Sarah, what does this mean? If he was really stealing money, then you knew. You tried to tell us. The pain in her voice was evident, but I felt surprisingly little satisfaction in being proven right. Months of being dismissed and mocked by my own family had left scars that wouldn't heal just because I'd been vindicated. By the time I got back to my hotel that evening, my phone had 17 missed calls. Jessica, Tom, my father, former colleagues who'd heard the news. Everyone wanted to talk to the woman who'd been married to the criminal, who'd somehow figured out what law enforcement and financial regulators had missed. The evening news coverage was even more extensive. They found Marcus's professional headshot, probably from the premier financial website, and juxtaposed it with footage of him in handcuffs. The contrast was jarring, the polished businessman versus the federal defendant. According to court documents, the anchor continued, Holloway used his position at Premier Financial to gain clients' trust, then diverted their money into fake investment schemes. The FBI was tipped off by someone close to the investigation. Someone close to the investigation. That was me, though they didn't use my name. I was the anonymous tipster who'd brought down Austin's most charming financial advisor. The phone rang. Again, this time it was Agent Walsh. How are you holding up? It's surreal. Seeing him on TV like that, it doesn't feel real yet. The media attention will intensify over the next few days. His arraignment is tomorrow, and the details of the charges will become public. Are you prepared for that? I think so. Will they identify me as the source? Not unless you choose to go public. The investigation records are sealed, and we haven't released information about how we learned of his activities. After she hung up, I sat in my hotel bed watching the coverage loop on different news channels. Each station had the same footage, Marcus being led away in handcuffs, looking stunned and diminished. The man who charmed investors, my family, and me for years had finally been revealed for what he truly was. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Sarah, I owe you an apology. A huge one. Can we talk? Then Jessica. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry we didn't believe you. And finally, my father, your mother is crying. We were wrong about everything. Can you forgive us? I stared at the messages, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. Yes, I'd been right. Yes, they'd been wrong to dismiss me. But the cost of being right had been enormous months of isolation, the destruction of my marriage, the loss of my family's trust and support when I needed it most. The live news report switched to footage from earlier in the day, showing Marcus being processed at the federal courthouse. As I watched my ex-husband's perp walk play out on television, I realized this was only the beginning. The trial, the media attention, the reckoning with my family, all of that was still to come. But for tonight, it was enough to know that justice had finally caught up with Marcus Holloway. The man who'd spent years stealing from innocent people, who'd built a life on lies and manipulation, was exactly where he belonged in federal custody, facing the consequences of his crimes. The woman my family had laughed at for leaving her perfect husband was no longer crazy. She was the hero of her own story. The letter arrived 2 days after Marcus's arrest, slipped under my hotel room door while I was at school. My mother's handwriting was immediately recognizable. The same careful script that had labeled my school lunch bags and signed permission. Slips throughout my childhood. Dear Sarah, I don't know how to begin this letter. There are no words adequate for how wrong we were, how badly we failed you when you needed us most. You came to us with the truth, and we not only refused to listen, we mocked you for it. I keep thinking about that dinner, about the way we laughed at you. The memory makes me physically sick. You were trying to protect us from learning something terrible about someone we'd welcomed into our family, and we treated you like you were the problem. Your father hasn't spoken since he saw the news. He's replaying every conversation, every time he defended Marcus over you. Tom called in sick to work because he can't face his colleagues after telling them his sister was having a breakdown. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we're asking for it anyway. We failed you as parents, as siblings, as people who claim to love you. If you can find it in your heart to give us another chance, we want to do better. All our love, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, sitting on my hotel bed with tears streaming down my face. The vindication I thought I wanted felt hollow and painful. Yes, they were sorry now. Yes, they finally understood what Marcus really was. But the damage had been done during those months when I needed them most. My phone rang. As I finished reading, Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, please don't hang up. I won't hang up. I saw the news about Marcus, and God, Sarah, I feel sick. We were so wrong about everything. Yes, you were. I keep thinking about that family dinner, about the things we said to you, about how we made you feel crazy for telling the truth. Her voice was thick with tears, and despite everything, my heart ached for her pain. Jessica had always been the golden child, the one who made perfect choices and never doubted herself. This reckoning was probably the first time she'd been completely wrong about something important. You told us he was stealing from people, and we acted like you were delusional. Meanwhile, he was sitting at our table eating Mom's pot roast, knowing he'd ruined families. I tried to show you the evidence. We didn't even look at it. We were so convinced that you were the problem, that you were throwing away a good thing. We never considered that maybe you knew something we didn't. There was a long pause before she continued. How did you figure it out? How did you know when the rest of us were completely fooled? I lived with him. I saw the inconsistencies, the lies, the way he'd changed. And maybe I paused, searching for the right words. Maybe because you all thought he was so perfect, I was the only one looking for flaws. We pushed you away when you needed us most. You did. Can you ever forgive us? The question hung in the air between us. Could I forgive them? The intellectual part of me understood that Marcus had been a master manipulator, skilled at making people see what he wanted them to see. But the emotional part of me was still raw from months of isolation and dismissal. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I want to, but I'm not there yet. That's fair. That's more than fair. Tom called that evening, his conversation shorter, but no less painful. My father left a voicemail that was just him crying and apologizing for 2 minutes straight. The hardest call came from my mother the next day. Sarah, can you meet me for coffee? I need to see you face to face. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory away from the family home where I'd been humiliated. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, as if the revelation about Marcus had aged her overnight. I've been thinking about what kind of mother makes her daughter feel crazy for telling the truth, she said without preamble. And I realized I've been doing it your whole life. That caught me off guard. What do? You mean you were always the different one, the one who chose teaching over a practical career, who asked uncomfortable questions, who saw things differently. Instead of celebrating that, I tried to push you toward what I thought was safer, more conventional. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. When you married Marcus, I was so relieved. Finally, Sarah had made a smart choice. Finally, she was living the life I thought she should live. So when you threatened that narrative, I protected it instead of protecting you. The conversation lasted 2 hours. She asked about the investigation, about how I gathered evidence. about what it had been like to live with the knowledge of Marcus's crimes. She listened without defensiveness, without trying to justify her actions. "What happens now?" she asked. As we prepared to leave, "I don't know. The trial will probably take months. I'll likely have to testify, and I need time to figure out if I can trust any of you again." "We'll wait," she said simply, "however long it takes." Driving back to my hotel, I felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. The anger I'd been carrying for months was still there, but it had shifted. My family's apologies couldn't undo the pain they caused, but they could be the beginning of something new. The letter from my mother sat on my dresser that night, next to the federal indictment that had vindicated me, two pieces of paper that represented the destruction of my old life and the possibility of building something better from the ruins. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I had hoped that my family relationships could be salvaged. But it would take time, work, and a complete rebuilding of trust that had been shattered when they chose a criminal over their own daughter. The reckoning had begun, but the healing would be a much longer process. The Austin American-Statesman article appeared on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest. The headline read, "Local Teacher's Courage Exposed $1 Million Fraud Scheme." Below, it was a photo of me standing outside my school, looking, far more confident than I felt. I hadn't intended to go public with my story, but when reporter Linda Chung contacted me about my role in the investigation, Agent Walsh encouraged me to speak. "The public needs to understand that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences," she'd said. "Your story might encourage other victims to come forward." The article detailed my discovery of Marcus's crimes, my decision to gather evidence, and my cooperation with the FBI. It painted me as a hero, but more importantly, it told the truth. About what had happened, Sarah Mitchell didn't set out to become a whistleblower. The 34-year-old middle school teacher simply wanted to understand why her husband of 8 years had become increasingly secretive about his work. What she discovered would lead to the largest investment fraud case in Austin's recent history. "I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined the scope of it," Mitchell said in an interview Tuesday. "When I realized how many people were being hurt, I knew I had to act." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My principal, Dr. Martinez, called me into her office that afternoon. "Sarah, I had no idea what you were dealing with," she said, sliding the newspaper across her desk. "This explains so much about the past few months." "I couldn't tell anyone about the investigation." "Of course you couldn't. But I want you to know how proud we are of you. What you did took incredible courage." The school district's communications director contacted me about potential media requests. Parents began stopping me in the hallway to shake my hand. My students who noticed my distraction over the past months looked at me with new respect. Mrs. Mitchell, one of my 8th graders, said after class, "You're like a real-life detective." "Just someone who did what was right," I replied. But I felt a warm glow at their admiration. The local news stations picked up the story, and by evening, I was watching myself on television, discussing financial fraud and the importance of reporting crimes. It was surreal seeing my face on screen with the caption, "Local Hero," beneath it. More importantly, the coverage brought additional victims forward. Agent Walsh called me that evening with an update. "3 more people contacted us today after seeing your interview. Apparently, Marcus had been running similar schemes with clients outside of premier financial people he met at social events, through networking groups. How much more money?" "At least another $500,000. Your decision to go public is helping. You've built an even stronger case." The vindication felt different than I'd expected. For months, I'd fantasized about the moment when everyone would realize I'd been right. But now that it was happening, I felt more sad than triumphant. Yes, people finally understood that I wasn't the unstable wife having a breakdown. But the cost had been enormous, not just to me, but to all the victims whose lives had been destroyed by Marcus's greed. Mrs. Henderson called me that weekend, her voice shaky with emotion. "Sarah, dear, I saw you on the news. I had no idea when you came to check on me months ago. You already knew, didn't you?" "I suspected. I wanted to make sure you were okay." All this time, I thought you were just being neighborly. You were protecting me." She paused, crying softly. "That man took everything my husband worked for, and you're the one who stopped him. How do I even thank you for that?" Her gratitude was humbling and heartbreaking. I'd done what needed to be done, but I couldn't give her back the money. Marcus had stolen or undo the financial devastation he'd caused. The Austin Business Journal ran a follow-up piece about the broader implications of the case, interviewing financial experts about red flags investors should watch for. They quoted me extensively, positioning me as someone who'd recognized the warning signs others had missed. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, producers from crime shows, even a literary agent who thought my story would make a good book. The attention was flattering but overwhelming. I wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and certainly not for something this serious. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Texas State Teachers Association nominated me for their annual Courage and Education Award, recognizing educators who go above and beyond their classroom duties to serve their communities. Your willingness to speak truth to power, even at great personal cost, exemplifies the values we try to instill in our students. The nomination letter read dots standing at my hotel room window that evening, looking out at the Austin skyline. I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a quietly unhappy wife living a lie. Now I was a divorced woman being called a hero, someone who'd brought down a criminal and protected dozens of families from further harm. The woman who'd been laughed at by her own family for filing divorce papers was now being interviewed by reporters and recognized by professional organizations. The breakdown my family had mocked was actually the most important decision I'd ever made. But more than the public recognition, what mattered was the knowledge that I'd found the strength to do what was right. I'd trusted my instincts over everyone else's opinions. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over security. The newspaper clipping sat on my dresser next to Agent Walsh's business card and my mother's apology letter, physical reminders of a journey that had tested everything I thought I knew about myself and the people I loved. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely proud of who I was becoming. Not the woman who'd been defined by her marriage to a successful man, but the woman who'd had the courage to tear down that facade when she discovered it was built on lies. The teacher who'd always encouraged her students to stand up for what's right had finally learned to follow her own advice. The therapy sessions began 3 weeks after the media attention died down. Dr. Rebecca Flores was a trauma specialist who worked with victims of financial crimes and domestic manipulation. Her office was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and overstuffed chairs that made difficult conversations feel safer. "Sarah, you've been through a significant trauma," she said during our first session. "Living with someone who was systematically deceiving you, then having your own family dismiss your reality, that's a form of psychological abuse. I'd never thought of it that way. In my mind, I was the strong one, the person who figured out the truth and taken action. But Dr. Flores helped me understand that strength and trauma weren't mutually exclusive. For years, you were trained to doubt your own perceptions. Marcus gaslit you, and then your family reinforced that when you tried to tell them the truth. Learning to trust your instincts again will take time. The work was harder than I'd expected. Some days I felt powerful and vindicated. Other days, I questioned everything: my judgment, my decisions, whether I'd handled things correctly. Dr. Flores assured me this was normal. You're reconstructing your sense of self after having it systematically undermined. That's not easy work. Meanwhile, life at school had transformed. The Courage and Education Awards ceremony was held at the Austin Convention Center, with over 500 educators in attendance. Walking across that stage to accept the crystal plaque felt surreal. "Sarah Mitchell represents the best of what educators can be," the presenter announced. She didn't just teach integrity in her classroom, she lived it in her daily life, even when it cost her everything. The standing ovation was overwhelming. Looking out at hundreds of my colleagues applauding, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in years. These were my people educators who understood that doing right sometimes meant making sacrificial choices. Dr. Martinez had worked behind the scenes to nominate me for the district's Teacher of the Year award as well. "Your students have noticed the change in you," she told me. You're more confident, more authentic. Whatever you've been through has made you a better teacher. She was right. My 7th graders responded to my increased confidence and authenticity. I'd stopped second-guessing myself, stopped apologizing for taking up space. The woman who'd once been afraid to challenge her husband's lies was now fearlessly advocating for her. Students' needs stopped. My relationships with my family were slowly healing, though it remained complicated. Sunday dinners had resumed, but they were different now, more honest, less performative. My mother had started therapy too, working on her tendency to prioritize appearances over authenticity. I realize I taught you to seek approval rather than trust yourself, she said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. I want to learn how to support who you really are, not who I think you should be. Jessica and Tom were trying hard to rebuild our relationships, but the damage ran deep. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal quickly. Still, their efforts meant something, and slowly, carefully, we were finding our way back to each other. The biggest surprise was the romantic interest from David Kim, a fellow teacher who'd asked me out after the awards ceremony. I've always admired your dedication to your students, he said over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. But watching how you handled this situation, your courage and integrity, that's incredibly attractive. Dating felt strange after 8 years of marriage, especially dating someone who knew my whole story. But David's respect for what I'd been through rather than pity or curiosity made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before. You're not damaged goods, Dr. Flores reminded me when I expressed doubt about whether I was ready for a relationship. You're a woman who's learned to trust herself and stand up for what's right. That's not damage. That's strength. The teaching award sat on the mantle of my new apartment, a bright, airy place with large windows and space for all my books. It was smaller than the house I'd shared with Marcus, but it was entirely mine, furnished with things I'd chosen, decorated in colors I loved. Looking at that crystal award each morning reminded me of who I'd become. Not just a teacher, but, truth teller, someone brave enough to speak up when others remained silent. The woman who'd been dismissed as unstable and paranoid had emerged as someone worthy of recognition and respect. The healing wasn't complete, might never be complete, but I was learning to live with the complexity of being both strong and wounded, vindicated and still processing trauma. Most importantly, I was learning to trust the voice inside me that had known all along that something was wrong. That voice had saved me, and it would guide me forward into whatever came next. 1 year later, I stood at my apartment door, keys in hand, preparing to leave for another monthly family dinner. But this time was different. This time, I was going not as the black sheep who'd embarrassed the family, but as the daughter they'd learned to respect and trust again. The mahogany dining room table looked the same, but everything else had changed. Marcus's empty chair had been replaced with a small bookshelf holding family photos pictures that included me, really including me in ways they hadn't before I'd found my voice. "Sarah, how's David?" My mother asked as she set down the pot roast. The same recipe she'd been making for decades. "He's good. We're taking things slow, but he's patient with my process." "Smart man," Tom said, raising his glass of wine. "He knows what he's got." The conversation flowed naturally, updates about work, plans for the holidays, Jessica's kids' activities. No one was performing for anyone else. No one was trying to impress with manufactured perfection. We were just a family, flawed but honest, learning to be real with each other. "Have you heard anything about Marcus?" My father asked carefully. This was still sensitive territory, but we'd learned to navigate it. "The sentencing is next month. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal, 7 years in federal prison, full restitution to the victims." 7 years? Jessica repeated quietly. "It seems like both too much and not enough." "It's justice," I said simply. Not perfect justice, but justice. The trial had been grueling, but cathartic. Testifying against my ex-husband in federal court, laying out the evidence I gathered, explaining how I discovered his crimes, it had been terrifying and empowering. The prosecution called me their star witness, the insider who'd blown the whistle on a sophisticated fraud operation. Marcus had looked older during the proceedings, his charm replaced by something hollow and defeated. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no residual love. Just the calm knowledge that I'd done the right thing. After dinner, I helped my mother clear the dishes, a ritual we'd been practicing since childhood, but now it felt different, more equal somehow. "I'm proud of you," she said as we loaded the dishwasher. "Not just for what you did with Marcus, but for who you've become through all of this." "I'm still becoming," I replied. "Dr. Flores says healing isn't a destination. It's a process. Wise woman." I'm thinking about seeing someone myself to work on being a better mother to the daughter I actually have, not the one I thought I wanted. Driving home to my apartment, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd filed for divorce 15 months ago had been desperate and isolated, dismissed by everyone she loved. The woman driving home tonight was confident, respected, surrounded by people who valued her courage and honesty. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "How was dinner? Want to talk about it over coffee tomorrow?" I smiled, typing back. "Dinner was good. Family is complicated but healing. Coffee sounds perfect." The relationship with David was different from anything I'd experienced with Marcus. It was built on truth from the beginning. He knew my whole story, understood my journey, respected the strength it had taken to get here. There were no performances, no trying to be who I thought he wanted me to be. At my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the Austin skyline. My teaching awards sat on the bookshelf, along with thank you letters from victims whose money had been recovered through the investigation. Visible reminders of a life rebuilt on authenticity instead of illusion. The key to my apartment, my own place. My own space, my own life sat on the table beside me. Such a small object, but it represented everything I fought for. Independence, truth, the right to trust my own instincts. Marcus had tried to convince me that no one would believe me, that I'd lose everything if I spoke up. He'd been wrong about the first part and partially right about the second. I had lost things: my marriage, temporarily my family's trust, the comfortable life I'd known. But what I'd gained was infinitely more valuable: self-respect, authentic relationships, the knowledge that I could survive anything, and most importantly, the unshakable confidence that came from choosing truth over comfort. The woman my family had laughed at for leaving her perfect husband was no longer seeking anyone's approval. She'd learned to approve of herself, to trust her own judgment, to speak her truth regardless of who believed her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more healing to do, relationships to nurture, students to teach. But tonight, sitting in my own home with my hard-won wisdom and quiet confidence, I was exactly who I was meant to be. The laughter had stopped long ago, but more importantly, I'd found my own voice, and I would never let anyone silence it again. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Let's build a community of support and understanding for those who found the courage to speak their truth.